When it comes to your sexual health, take it from someone who's been there before. Take it from me. Today, Graham talks to James about managing mental illness through a relationship.
I moved out to LA. I was pretty young. I was about 19 years old. And all my family's from the East Coast. I was going from like a great support system. My parents were divorced, and that's a whole other story. But I was going from everybody around me, few close friends in high school, to being completely isolated. And I kind of hit a point of like really, really bad depression. I'd felt that on and off through adolescence, but it just kind of snuck up on me and got worse and worse. And having, zero friends, talking to my mom on the phone every day. But noticing lots of depression. I'm bipolar type 2, so the hypomanic, as I came to learn, episodes kind of came later as I became a little bit more social. But anyway, I tried to go to a therapist and was doing like cognitive behavioral therapy for a while. And I went to a few specialists to kind of figure out if they could get a diagnosis.
Okay.
So I told them my symptoms. I told them kind of the spectrum of my moods, how I would be really low, but then I would occasionally go into these points of extroversion and overstimulation. There was this one time where I drove, there was a fire, and I remember I stayed up all night till like 4 a.m. and I drove towards the fire to see how close I could get. So I guess I told them things like that, and they said, okay, maybe you might be bipolar type 2.
So I was first diagnosed with bipolar when I was a teenager, roughly about 14 or 16. Shortly after that was my first real suicide attempt and hospitalization. And my mom was just really, really concerned because I was a cutter. I was actually cutting at the time. I think this one was from my second major suicide episode. This was from around that time. I think some of these were as well. When you're doing that, that's very, very concerning. It's very scary. So she wanted me to get help. I needed the help. I was admitted to a hospital. I stayed for, I think, 3 days. But it's so tough because the isolation. So around that time, and I'd been in therapy since I was about 8 because my parents also got divorced when I was young. And, my dad was not equipped to handle a divorce. He wasn't even equipped to handle a son. No support from him, and he was very anti-medication, anti-medicine, anti-help, anti-everything, basically. And so I think a lot of the trauma of going through that kind of stuff, I was an 8-year-old kid being left on a farmhouse by myself for a couple days at a time. I had to feed myself, I had to take care of the chickens, the rabbits, the horses, all this other shit. So that was really, really tough, and I think some of that I just never really got over, as a teenager. So when I felt lonely, I felt like that, being left home alone in a haunted-ass farmhouse. I stayed in treatment kind of off and on. I got on Seroquel around this time. So this one was, and I got more on my legs, was when the cutting came back. I was around 22, and I had lost my job. I'd just broken up with my girlfriend. My dog had died, all within the span of a week or two. It was a shitty, shitty time. And so I got extremely drunk and was just very, very depressed, and I started cutting again. Kind of shortly around then was this isn't how I want to feel. I would like to be happy. And I started really taking my therapy seriously, what can I do to improve? And most of all, I wanted to learn more about bipolar. What is this disease? What do I have? Because if I had cancer, if I had cerebral palsy, if I had any other serious illness, I would want to understand it. How can I notice my symptoms? What are some things that I can do to stop myself if I'm manic, if I'm depressed? And I started feeling better. And then it's interesting because when I came out here to LA was the first time I actually got off meds. I told my therapist and my psychologist, I said, I feel like I have a management on my symptoms, on what I'm dealing with. I want to be off meds. I'm no longer comfortable with this medication and the extra symptoms it gives me. And then I crashed again when I lost my job around 2017, and it just wasn't working, and I actually ended up getting an emotional support animal, which is incredible. One of the best therapies you can ever do, and that dog has saved my life. He's actually trained now. I've trained him as a service dog specifically for my manic and depressive episodes. Because the last time that I attempted suicide was in 2018. I was standing on the subway platform. I was going to jump in front of the damn thing as it comes along. And I called 1-800-SUICIDE, and it really stopped. It stopped. It did.
They talked you down from it.
They did. They literally talked me off the ledge. And again, that's when I started training my service dog, and it's just given me a whole new outlook on life, and they're an incredible resource. It's always tough dealing with this and the suicide just to be able to reach out and ask for help. That's one of the biggest things that for anyone, if you're mentally ill, is just ask for help. Again, for me, some people don't have a good dad around that you can ask, so you need to have a friend. And if you don't have a friend or a family or a dog or anyone you can ask for help, please call 1-800-SUICIDE. I'm very lucky with my wife. I had been dealing with bipolar for all my life pretty much, and so I was very comfortable with talking about it. And I told my wife on it was either our first or second date, I can't remember, and just kind of describing what it is. It's a chemical imbalance in the brain. There's highs, there's lows. She's extremely supportive. I am very, very lucky. But not everyone's like that. There's still a big stigma against mental health, and from what I've seen and heard and just generally recommend is you kind of got to take your own time and talk to them in your own way, in your own time about it. If you don't want to disclose it, don't disclose it.
I have a girlfriend. We've been together 4 years.
When did you tell her you were bipolar?
I told her, I'd say within the first month. She would always say, you have like 25 different personalities. I'm probably showing you one right now.
Right.
Because one is befitting of this kind of situation.
Exactly.
But there are all these other different versions of myself that come out. I'm sure it's probably the same with you.
Did you tell your girlfriend how to kind of deal with it when you're in those symptoms?
It's hard to tell her when I'm in it. Usually things are going okay, and she's usually very understanding, but occasionally it will precipitate some sort of a conflict.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's hard to find the wherewithal to move and to get out of bed. But with the person you're with often thinks it's about them.
Yeah.
It's about how you feel in the relationship. And that can be really hard. It can be hard to have low energy and have to locate a certain reserve of energy to explain to somebody that it's really not them and it's you. And I've dealt with this in other relationships too. When they don't believe what you're telling them, that's really hard to kind of rebound from. And I've never had mania per se, but I've had hypomania. On the flip side, I found I can actually be my most engaging. I can be the person who wants to go on a road trip,
right?
Who wants to stay up all night talking and have adventures or something like that.
My wife is always like, why can't you be more like that? When I tell her the symptoms. So
Exactly.
Sorry, brain doesn't work.
How does that affect intimacy based on the side of the spectrum that you're in?
Well, it's definitely, there's a lot of hypersexuality when you're manic, at least for me, and that can be very interesting when it comes out of the blue. I'm married, so I don't have to worry about being with multiple people or not using protector, whatever.
Yeah.
It hasn't been a bad thing for me in the marriage, so I've been able to manage it. Now, in the past, when I was single, I definitely had a lot of hypersexuality where it would just be download Tinder, see what's out there, let's meet up. Nothing where I ended up in a bad situation. I'm sure that's happened for folks with bipolar, but I was very, very fortunate, at least in that aspect.
There's some sort of a safeguard that you're working on or developing? Because I know we all have these potential things that are going to happen to us. Is there a strategy that you have that you've acquired throughout the previous times?
Yeah, that's a really good question. One of the best things one of my therapists gave me was I don't know how to describe it, I guess kind of a checklist. So it's like, if I'm feeling this, these are some things that I know that can pick me up, right? If these things do not work, these are some people that I can call, and you just list those things out. Really, really helpful. And my wife being together now, I'm very, very fortunate again. She knows some of my symptoms, so she can pick up on things and she can get me help if needed. And then my mom was the first one to push me towards therapy, so she's typically one of the first people that I reach out to if I'm really feeling down. And a lot of it really is going to be on you, the person with this, to want to get help. I don't know if it's a good analogy or a bad analogy, but for a lot of addicts, I have an addict in my family, they have to want to get help. They have to hit rock bottom. You're always going to be burdened with this, unfortunately, and it has to be on you to want to get help. Do you have a support system out here?
That's the main difference besides
Take my number when we're done filming. Take my number when we're done filming.
I would love to do that.
If you're ever in crisis, call me.
I would definitely appreciate that. Thank you so much.
For more trusted sources on the topics that matter to you, go to getmegiddy.com.